I wouldn't be anywhere near a computer if it were not for the fact that it were a rainy afternoon. Now there's a part 3. I'm a bit too tired, really, to do it. I'll do it. Might have to redo it. Tired, not because of any emotional drain. I've been busy getting organised the last 3 months. I'm the most organised person in the whole world. Every single little bit of paper and whatever else in there is precisely placed to carry on operating in a way that I have for actually about 15 years. There's an errata in video number 1. But this is where it gets funny. Not that I have any interest in pursuing any kind of presence in the world of a fairly minor disease that certainly needed caution. And that's the point. I'll come to that in a moment. But there's an errata. I say locum doctor in the same sentence that the word bitch is used. Now I bet you people will... I actually occasionally make videos more about environmental things than anything else. It's exactly the same thing. You see, this bolshiness is also a truly trite jumping to conclusions. I listened to myself saying a phrase. I thought, what did I say? Yeah. See, there you go. Even that sounds arrogant and narcissistic. When you spent 10 years even battling your own people within the Green Party, yes, I was rattling on about something there for a couple of years. Truly dedicated vote harvesters, forget it. They're towny neurotics who the environment, I think only in terms of regions, is made up of farming land. 97% of green would-be politicians are absolutely terrified of farmers and neurotic townies. And I'm afraid to say, even when they're presented due to hard work with farmers who said they would like to speak to their green candidates for various reasons, they'd had enough with supermarket practices, the neurotic, sex-obsessed Greens, in other words, which hole are you sticking it up? It's the lowest common denominator form of politicking, the way they act. They wouldn't even go and see the farmers who'd asked to see their candidates. And I'm no fool. I keep very, very fulsome records of every single interaction I have, and could never be done for libel or anything like that. Yes, an errata. I said locum. Sorry, I said intern doctor. No, locum doctor. For many years, locum doctor. Now, the problem with actually all media is how people fail to tell their stories. Sometimes you can do really comprehensive fact-checking, cross-referring, 3 sources kinds of journalism on difficult subjects. Not very often, actually. So tell a story instead. Now, I have no interest in health. Health is just health. Other than keep a positive, keep your life force going, for real. Not the fake version, not the version off a menu that they try and serve you at £50 an hour for mindfulness and nonsense in places like down there. which all fails, by the way. I know the practitioners, and they're about as unmindful as you can get when you see them in their usually quite expensive house. Right, yes, so, well, I certainly wouldn't call any person a bitch, so I actually said, aren't I a bitch? And that was not the sort of thing I normally say. I'm playing, I'm hamming. I'd actually done the work, which means, and actually this is about the most important thing there is not apparently anything to do with the current pandemic, which we are told, even now, we know full well what the Tories are doing. They're saying, oh, yeah, how can we just push this down the road? Which is actually the scientifically correct approach to the whole thing. Herd immunity, a phrase that unfortunately was, well, it was jumped on by the vested interests that didn't even know they were vested interests at the time last year, is the correct policy. It's funny how nobody talks about Sweden anymore. Anyway, yeah. So we're told that the defining factor now is if we have, is it 400 hospital admissions a day in London, something like that. Now, there's two things. But by the way, in my little few paragraphs of essay, bizarrely, I wrote this morning, I deliberately did not put in my list of great scientific thinkers, who are all of the Jewish persuasion, by the way. So be it. The talk radio lot can have a fight with that as well. We'll come to that in a minute. I deliberately didn't put E.O. Wilson, the supposed founder of sociobiology. No, he went a bit off track. But anyway, the best of the lot really was Stephen Jay Gould, because his delivery was all a bit, well, it might be this way. You see, it isn't sexy like Dawkins. It isn't authoritative and sort of Oxford Donish like E.O. Wilson. And the problem with Oxford Dons is they come with the cachet of some aristocratic, usual quite deviant private behaviours. No, Jay Gould, lovely, sweet, bumbling, not handsome. Ditto Lewontin. But let's get to the point here. Yeah, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Is it 5 years ago? So I had a period where trying to get the bottom of a bug I had. And it just so happened that it coincided with a strike, in quotation marks, from junior doctors, I think, by junior doctors. And I happened to be going for a test at the hospital. And I went up to them, and the BBC reporter was there, who I'd encountered a few times in the past. BBC radio reporter. And I said, I walked up to them. I said, you're having the wrong strike. They were striking against more overtime, or whatever. Look it up. I said, you're having the wrong strike. Now, unfortunately, this is a 10-sentence at least thing, but I worked in a vocation that was equivalent to profession in my 20s and early 30s. In fact, very much a profession where it was categorically understood that, particularly when you joined for the first few years, you were self-employed. That way, and there I could name names, very well-known, rather aristocratic names who'd founded companies could avoid paying your national insurance. It was completely understood. And okay, you could put down your vehicle costs and your stationery costs and your telephone bill against your income. It was a scam because you worked for one company. And it kind of worked for both sides. But it was categorically understood. There was one thing categorically understood. You were loyal to that company. That company called you on Christmas Day, even though you're a self-employed freelance piece worker essentially, albeit at then £100 a day. You generally, well, what do they call them now? Minimum 0 hours contract. They've been around forever. Let's talk about locum doctors. So there I was, and I was saying to the doctors stood outside, about 5 of them, you need to be striking for a 35-hour week, which in civilized, intelligent societies like France is well understood to be the actual maximum amount of work, such that your productivity per hour is at its peak. If you're well rested, well slept, your productivity is so much better. And in the case of doctors, let's talk safety for the patients. But the real issue, which I then spoke with them about, they wouldn't listen to. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a little room in the hospital with a Asian origin old lady nurse, and I shared it with her. I said to her, these locum doctors, now it's well understood that essentially 10 billion quid a year is going on inflated fees, wages. NHS may pay X per day, let's call it £1,000 a day or £500 a day for the locum staff member, and an agency takes a huge chunk. But also, that suits the locum doctor. They have no need, they have no accountability in reality. They can sit there to their day-a-week patients and say, you need continuity, but they're not going to give it because they've got it sorted beautifully. They get paid more pro rata per hour. They've got far more choice. Well, they can basically adjust their schedule to how they wish. These are people who are working locum for the same practice or practices for years. But they get paid more per hour if they do it through the locum arrangement. I call that just downright selfish. And apart from anything else, it's costing the taxpayer an absolute fortune. And I shared this with this many years nurse who was about to take some blood from my arm. And she said to me, we had a great chat. She said, do you know what? You're the first person that's ever said that. And you're damn right. I see it day in, day out. You've just spoken of the reality of what is the really rather mad state of affairs. Wonderful. We had a great chat. It's not a case of being told you're right. It's a case of finding one other human being who actually will attempt to listen and respond in an intelligent human way to an obviously very valid opinion. But no, nobody will talk about that. And because it doesn't lead to crisis news broadcasting, crisis in doctors, crisis in hospitals. So we're told, no, I'm not in Wales. Wales is a mile away. We're told that we must restrict our behaviour because of the potential crisis in hospitals, because there aren't enough nurses, etc. Well, there's your actual reason. Total greed. No, okay, that sounds nasty. We know there are many heroic doctors. Total and utter dystopian inability to sort out a very straightforward problem, which is costing the taxpayer, the NHS, absolutely billions. But then, why did I turn my camera on? I turned my camera on to say, yes, see, even I get sucked away from what nobody in the media can say, because this is completely and utterly, well, there are two things here. And one is, well, it's impossible to know if it's deliberate. Number two, it's impossible ever to, in a post-enlightenment truth analysis way, discover the truth. So item one is, you see, nobody can say for the, I knew I was going to be gentrified out of where I lived 2 years ago. In fact, I've had an extra year and a half where I live because of COVID, or rather, the reaction to this new pathogen. Wonderful. Total silver lining. Complete and utter joy and paradise. But then there's something, let's put it in Navarra media kind of terms, although they can't talk like this. They, as I said, robots, they just chatter out what they think is the right little line. I mean, in other words, 99.9% of journalists just became politicians. They're politicizing their own endless cycle of, well, it's not a virtuous circle, it's the exact opposite. For the bottom third, quite a few of whom I know very intimately, because I've spent time assisting with, as a sort of turbo citizens advice person at times. I gave up. They don't listen anymore. They can't. And I was good. But the bottom third, on the verge of rent arrears, unemployment, financial penury, for a fairly decent proportion of their lives. What began around the 25th of March 2020 is wonderful. There is a huge benefit that nobody will talk about. And I understand psychology, and as much as anybody can, the greatest experts in the world cannot unpick what you have, your cultural construct, which is often, now is essentially what's in your subconscious. By definition, it's very difficult to unpick it from how the attitudes, the psyche, be they negative or positive or whatever, affect your biochemical system. But staying on point one, the removal of shame as of the 25th-ish of March 2020. For quite a few will have actually been rather magnificent. In other words, we've had the absurdly unequal, expanding inequality, which is absurd because every single, I know one or two really top historian, very, very Tory historian types. And even they will say that it's not even, it's like a fact. When you have great inequality, it don't end well. It never does. Never in the history of humanity. Sooner or later, if we want to call them the mob, sooner or later, it doesn't end well. Anyway, point. Yes, the removal of shame. There are very few emotions that actually really affect you deeply in your gut. really, really. But shame is one. When I say gut, I mean the unmeasurable interaction between the subconscious and how your body is actually performing all aspects of your body. Shame is without doubt one of them that's real. So the removal of shame, it's no longer a big deal to say you're homeless. No longer a big deal to say my business, mine did, essentially stop. 2020. No shame. It's wonderful. It's genuinely wonderful. That's not trite. That's terribly positive. But the whole of the machine, the commentariat, including all the commenters. I mean, it's just, this is why I'm leaving the country. There's no point. Nobody can think like that because they're not guided into it by truly neutral, truly thoughtful pundits or interrogators, i.e. interviewers. It's just so rapid in the headlights. All of it. I don't know of any commentator who is free of this rabbit in the headlights thing. Or any scientist, or even the scientists on the side of attempting to be more thoughtful. I was just watching one. I don't really do that very often. There's a reason. I actually randomly encountered the lady who hosts the channel, and I wasn't looking for any anti-vaxxer. I haven't commented on it. In fact, there's a very good piece. But I believe, I don't know, no comment on vaccinations. I'm far more interested in item 2, which essentially is freedom of speech, but that's then going to go off on another tangent. But it's so interesting. I put a line on now. Yeah, the last thing I want in the world, no disrespect. I mean, I entirely adhere to the Voltairean principle, updated. I will die for your right to write or even think the most absurd, jumping to conclusion, bolshy, prejudiced, idiotic things about me. I will die for your right for that. I also will die for my own right not to bother reading them. You know, the assuming, the jumping to conclusions is terrible, and that's why there's no point. I've been talking with people about intelligent subjects for a long time. There's no, in a very, very quiet, low-key way. Gentle street corner stuff. There's no point. That's what you're spending all that time looking into those screens really biochemically does not make you feel good about anything. For example, trying to have a balanced and funny disagreement with somebody. Debate. The language that even my rather enjoyed once friends who follow the sort of talk radio kind of media, their language is just absurd. They've been propagandized, schooled, used, prostituted, in fact, into using words like division. There is no division. It's entirely artificial. But the quality, the total and utter lack of pathos, of an ability to laugh at oneself, of people like whatever the chubby chap is who does talk radio, that I think on his desk I looked at that a bit to see what their take was on freedom of speech, and they've got no elegance, they've got no quiet authority. It's all this bolshy language. It's all this language of the. It would be an insult to the football terraces to say it's the language of the football terraces, which I've never been to, by the way. That sounds like I'm an elitist ponce, but I'm sure on the football terraces. No, I know on the football terraces there is some genuine artistry in the insult and the humour, the jabbing at the opposition. No, Mike Graham is his name. I mean, it is total narcissism. But what's even worse narcissism is this. One line of comment. They call themselves the champions of free speech. I see it's being removed. And I think we'll do an experiment. Should we put, it wasn't even a comment. It was just sharing a fact. I suppose you get assumptions and it's this quick look at something. I mean, it's impossible. There are a few exceptions. Malala Yousafzai, heroine of the universe. It's quite obvious right from the beginning. Authentic, brave, courageous, real. You'll learn from her. There are very few opinions you can go into or come across and straight away understand whether or not the opinion is worth listening to or you're going to learn from it. It takes hours, days, books. But this new, well, it's not new, that's the thing. It's kind of so quick to this knowing judgment. Ah, that line, dubious, suspicious. Don't get rid of it. Freedom of speech is indivisible within, of course, the many decades well understood lines of not inciting harmful acts against person or property for that matter. I am a total 1000% bunny hugging, genuinely, hedgehog rescuing, caring about every flower, every weed person. But this morning, I spent a wonderful half an hour chatting up, as we do sometimes when we encounter each other, a local huntswoman, because she's the only one for miles I've ever met, randomly 3 years ago, who never takes it to heart. She even took me riding a couple of years ago, after I'd said to her, "You do know that I'm a fully paid up sab." And she's very senior in the hunt. Oh, wonderful. It's such a wonderful relief. That's why I'm tired. I've had such a lovely morning. It's such a wonderful relief to come across somebody, which I'm afraid to say only genuinely rural people seem to be able to do these days. They understand that human foibles, opinions are pretty irrelevant. It's the welfare, the spirit as well of and around animals that is all that matters. There are no two sides. I repeat. I even accidentally ended up on the front of a newspaper. Accidentally, because had certain people seen it, they would have actually harmed me. I ended up on the front of the newspaper under an Extinction Rebellion headline, when actually I was just going there to make a joke at a friend of mine. I was caught, photographed as the... I was at their demonstration for 1 minute, making a cheeky quip. But I ended up the face of... Anyway. Yeah, categorically, one's local identity is genuinely passionate, dedicated, environmental person I don't mind being seen speaking with, smiling with, laughing with my friend, the senior huntswoman. There are no sides. There are only real people. Except I don't think there are any of them left. Is that why I turned my doodah on? Yes, the shame thing. That's the thing that matters. You see? And it also segues into something which is genuinely serious. And in a way, I'm guilty of myself. You see, once the problem with all of this, and I think this personalised media, let's call it that. I actually just call it homemade media. Even talk radio is pretty homemade. Fine, no problem. There's always been rough cut, rough and ready. Self-made media, it's generally better. Yep, so I was looking at I took a picture of the chubby, truly awful, deliberately, Howard Stern did things with a certain amount of, I didn't particularly like him, but I valued his attempts at trying something new. But people like Mike Graham, I'm sorry. But yeah, looking at the chubbiness of Mr. Graham. Now, of course, that's a personal insult, and we should never do that. It's not meant to be like that. I wouldn't wish Mr. Graham a bad cold, despite being quite a harmful person at the end of the day. But here's the problem. Once it's even out there in initial reports, so to speak, that overweight people are more likely to suffer from a more dangerous illness after coming into contact with the COVID bug. See, once that's out there, there's the just as important thing. The placebo effect is so real that people can even be given false, made-up back operations and report that they feel and are a tremendous amount better after that operation. In other words, your mind is tricked. But then there's the innocent trickery of just something becoming Dawkins' only great input into the canon of thought was the word meme. Once something becomes a meme, in other words, once it's been said and taken up with some authority randomly here and there, shut up, I've got my... Then it's in there, it's almost like it's in your DNA, it's in your mental, it literally is part of your subconscious. You cannot put it back in the bottle like the genie. And you can't do a random double-blind controlled experiment. Take a thinner person and a chubby person like Mr. Graham, subject them to a year and a half of the whole thing that so many people have been subject to, which even the gung-ho types, I'm sure they have their own private worry. You can't subject them, the people, you can't do the experiment where people are subject to the same roughly kind of inputs in terms of information that they encounter and settles within them. And there is no measurement for how that which is in your subconscious might interact. It's the wrong word, but there probably aren't any words for this because it's unmeasurable, it's unresearchable for almost everything. I've read a lot about this. Whatever, let's just imagine there's a substance. If you've got a bottle of it flowing in your veins at a certain speed, your system will be optimum. But that substance is, the rate of flow and the amount of it is affected by the real sort of fear, negativity setting of your subconscious. It's impossible to measure whether or not Mr. Graham's subconscious and Mr. Thin Person's subconscious may be putting out, the levels of what ends up in kind of measurable in the in what is the placebo effect, or the way that we perceive something, or rather our subconscious feels about something, and how that interacts with this system that's ongoing, the binder liquid that's flowing around you. It's impossible to measure it. It's impossible to understand it. So there's no knowing. But what we do know is that there are going to be people who, despite the smiles they might present deep down inside of them, are going to feel pretty negatively. If they get their positive COVID test, there will be, for many. I mean, I'm a thin person. I'm very fit. If I get my positive COVID test, my little internal fear / dread setting isn't going to be as bad as most people who are pretty chubby. Because even if they've gone through their lives, as a lot of chubby people do, laughing it all off, chubby people often have a kind of persona, which is a compensation in a way. And bless their cotton socks, I have no opinions. But I do know that if it's possible to know, that their internal subconscious dread setting, should they get a positive test, is going to be worse, going to be more severe. And that does, in unmeasurable ways, and not understandable ways, have a feedback loop into your cardiovascular, your immunity, your overall, the chemical soup that makes up your biochemical system. Fair bit of it we still don't understand, probably never will. It's the interactions between all the different systems are so complicated. I could waffle on about all sorts of quite good examples. So yes, you see, the problem now is that for many people, you've heard people say, it's all exhausting. So many people are exhausted. Well, I'm not. The only thing exhausting is bothering to think about it again. This non-event. We should be having the conversation about cancer, which a lot more people are dying of, or strokes, or alcohol poisoning. But it's all just politics. This political taking forward, or rather, I can't be bothered to think of the right words. This sort of fear, because that's how it ends up for most people. New variant. We shouldn't even be using the phrase new variant, because there have been so many new variants. New variant is the norm. There have been so many variants, just as I'm sure that is the case with many other pathogens. I probably look like a ghost with this on. Oh well. Yeah, so many people. It's the effect, the subconscious, the biochemical effects of the psychological state that many people have ended up in, which is immeasurable. I'm not talking about things like which are measurable, like depression and anxiety, or to a certain extent measurable. No, there is without a doubt some existential angst, some immeasurable thing, some change in the psyches of many, if not the great majority of people, which is going to have almost, well, it doesn't, no, one thing's for certain, it doesn't have a positive effect on their outcomes when threatening pathogens or other illnesses come along. That's one thing's for certain. So it's all unpickable, which makes it absurd, even real scientists. In fact, I'll put a link up to Marcus Twain's video. Yeah. It's absurd to even speak of the data. That's the thing. You know, these things are only ever an approximation. And when without a doubt, I mean, just think of it this way. Just think of it as a 5-year-old would think of it. Oh, you've got possibly new scary. Now, you've got this thing we call new variant. Now, that sounds scary. Coming along just before Christmas. I mean, that's a very emotive cocktail. And that, no matter what people are reading about, well, it doesn't seem too bad yet, is going to have had this negative or certainly not positive effect on the life force, the spirit, this pretty important aspect of your biochemistry, which is originates via the meme or thought or debate. It is thought, the idea. So there we go. You're in the ultimate rabbit hole, which is, yeah, I would have a reset. Yeah. Turn the whole damn thing off. Now, there's a footnote to that. I'm not going to bother editing it into. It takes about an hour with the computer on to merge a 40-minute section with a 5-minute section. Yeah, there's a footnote. I've forgotten what it is now. There's two actually. Now there is a tragedy in this. I live in the middle of nowhere. I think there are about 10 coloured people of colour, within about 15 miles. The amount of disgusting, well, the thing that's horrified me last year is hearing so many people. First thing they'd say to you is, well, it's the blacks that get it, you know, which is actually factually incorrect. If you're going to make a statement, at least have some basic understanding of science. Oh, the other things come back. Right. Best reference is, it's often said that people of a dark hue are more prone to schizophrenia. That is also not true. In that, if you're going to use language, you have to be terribly careful of the language you use, not in a woke, politically correct way, which has destroyed humanity. Reference the Horizon programme. It was on Daily Motion, called Why I Went Mad. A very good section in it. This thing, which in itself is a problematical term, but schizophrenic symptoms. In fact, if you can say there's one risk factor, it is, there are obviously several, but one that the bossocracy focuses on the most, is in fact being other people who are dispossessed, who are moved, who are transplanted. There you go. Because in fact the highest incidence in the world by far of schizophrenic symptoms is it Faroes? Look at the program. Iceland, the Faroes, because no, Greenland, because there are a huge amount of people. Sorry, wrong. Denmark, because there are a huge amount of people who are dispossessed, transplanted from places like Greenland. There's a very high proportion. I may even have the country wrong. It doesn't matter. The detail never matters. A white country that has a very high proportion of very transplanted people, in other words, completely removed from their previous location and cultural landscape, to a white country, white people to a white country have the highest incidence of these schizophrenic symptoms. But you see, I know if I were an intelligent person, I mean, without a doubt, there are lifestyle aspects to whether or not one is more likely to have a more serious illness. And it may well be that many people who've come here for one reason or another, maybe they're more confined to inner cities, etc., etc. In fact, well, that's how I started with this, have a lifestyle. That's not because of their colour, it's their lifestyle. But also, it's that imperceptible factor. You see, this is where the tragedy begins. I mean, Trevor Phillips did actually quite a good talk on this, although they never go far enough. He did 7 or 8 months ago. You see, I know if I were a middle-class black person, intelligent, thoughtful, above all thought of skin colour, which is what I am as a white person, I know, though, that deep down I'd have a little niggling worry if there were COVID in my street. Yes, but I know it's likely to have racist undertones and be perverted by the ignorant. But this possibility that people with my skin colour may indeed, for some reason, maybe it's the vitamin D problem, and that conscious or it's going to be there in the subconscious, it is going to it becomes a vicious circle, a real one that medicine can't break you out of. Now, what was the other thing? Oh, it's gone. No, it's gone. So be it. Footnote. It's gone. Better turn my camera off. Footnote. This was going to be footnote 1, footnote 2, but yeah. I've monitored out of curiosity the total. You see, why nothing, I mean nothing, should be listened to, frankly. Oh, I'm not an anarchist. I believe in strong environmental law. I'm afraid to say human beings exploit, damage, are greedy when it comes to nature. Nothing should be listened to. There have been 1 or 2 BBC programmes on, well, how did we, the journalists, the commentariat, do in the pandemic? Well, let's stick to May, June 2020. The amount of times, no, always, I would hear the following, and then I would hear the people say the following. More Americans are dying. Trump's destroyed America. I wouldn't, certainly I'm not a Trump person, but no, the only conceivable measure of a pathogen, an illness, anything being more prevalent in this artificial construct called a nation, even though there is some genuine cultural construct in a nation, is rate per, the official approved arbitrary number is rate per 100,000. Certainly most of 2020, the rate per 100,000 of people going into hospital. And let's be crystal clear, there are a whole range of things that we don't talk about in respect of lifestyle. Although I don't do it myself, I'm fully aware that many, many middle-aged people in Britain are popping all sorts of grey market, semi-recreational pharmaceuticals, i.e. super-strength Viagra. I'm told on good authority that probably half the blokes in your average city, 56 years old, buying grey Viagra down the pub, which will have some side effects. Anyway, lifestyle. It's impossible to fully quantify the effects of aspects of lifestyle, because of course you've also got this subconscious stuff going on as well. But anyway, to the point, keeping it short and sweet. Every supposedly intelligent, most of them went to Oxbridge, commentator last year, and this includes all the internet commenters, the total inability, well, 99%, to manage a simple analysis that a 7-year-old could manage. Rate of death or illness per 100,000 is a kind of reasonable measure. When you're dealing in the absolute numbers and comparing populations which are 5 or 6 times by magnitude different, the absolute number is irrelevant. But no, it seems that, yes, every single journalist, every single pundit was unable in it's not hysteria, it's just the nervous breakdown, to even manage that very straightforward communication of something that is a reasonable, scientific-ish approach to anything. In other words, you have a whole class, other than some of the experts, properly scientifically trained people, you have a whole class of people, and many will have been making your policies in your departments and countries, Wales, who are to call them scientifically illiterate would be an insult to illiterate people. They just are Teletubbies, completely unable to manage any careful communication of something that's reality, which is actually why I'd forget the whole damn thing.